Hello and welcome to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor with me, Nassim Ahmed. Today I want to discuss one of the biggest shifts in the post-Gaza genocide era, which is the split within the MAGA movement between Israeli firsters and America firsters. Since 9/11, many would say, at least for the past 3, 4 decades, the right was unified by its hostility towards Islam and Muslims. But the shift we have seen over the past 2 years within the MAGA movement is something which none of us could have predicted. While many of us would say, there is still antipathy towards Islam and Muslims within MAGA generally, there is a growing chasm between what many would say are Israeli first and America first. So in this episode, I want to discuss this further with Jamal Kanj. Jamal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Jamal is the author of Children of Catastrophe, Journey from a Palestinian Refugee Camp to America, and other books. He writes frequently on Arab world issues for various national and international commentaries. So I'm interviewing Jamal because he published an article recently with Memo about this very issue, how Israel first Jewish Americans plan to re-monopolize the narrative on Palestine. So we have seen, Jamal, as you mentioned in your article, there is a counter-offensive by the Israeli first because of the setback they faced over the past 2 years. But before we get into that, just for the purpose of setting the context of this discussion, why don't we spend some time just discussing the history of Israel-US relation. Israel, many would say, is the 51st state of the United States of America. There are many reasons we could cite for why Israel is joined at the hip with the United States. Reasons being, during the Cold War, it was seen as a way to push back against communism, push back against Arab nationalism. But there are also as many reasons why many find this relationship to be very, very odd, because as we are seeing now, Israel is a reason why US has been involved in wars after wars in the Middle East. So this is one of the key arguments for why Israel should not be joined to the hip with Israel. So you mentioned yourself in that article, very article I mentioned earlier on, the nature of the United States relationship with Israel defies logic and reason. It is a parasitic and one-sided. So do you want to just kind of give us the key points you're trying to make in explaining why you think the relationship defies logic and reason, why it is parasitic and one-sided?
I mean, to start with, I would say there is no, economic or strategic interest for the US as far as its relationship with Israel. Israel, however, created an environment, a political environment, where they were able to convince the politicians, mostly through money, and we'll talk about that, through AIPAC, and also the public by controlling and manipulating information, that Israel is a strategic alliance for the US and the Middle East. I mean, if you go back actually to 1948, when Israel was when the US recognized the Israeli establishment of the state over Palestine, I mean, the president at the time, I mean, the American president at the time, basically made it very clear, to his Department of State, that opposed the recognition of Israel. I mean, he said that I have this many votes I can get. What am I going to get from the other side? So there is that relationship, which is a symbiotic relationship, basically, between the elected officials and the ability of the Israeli lobby to influence election in the United States. And truly, the relationship between the US and Israel did not really materialize or became essential to the US until after 1967 war, when they were able to take over Sinai, the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights. From that point on, the relationship moved into a different level, as you might say. However, when it comes to strategic interest for the US, there's no strategic interest for the US at all when it comes to Israel. Their interest is, if you look at it, uh, economic interest is in the Middle East, is with Arab countries that supposedly provide the largest number of energy in the world. What does Israel provide? Zero to that. A strategic interest as location, also the Arab worlds. I mean, more than 20 countries, they would provide that base for the US, a strategic base for the US. Israel can provide nothing. It's almost like 1/10 possibly of the geographic area in that region. So they were able to create, however, the false perception that Israel is defending the interest of the US, when in fact Israel defines the interest of the US by by its own interest. The latest war with Iran is an example of that. I mean, they were able to convince, at least the media, were able to convince many people uh, that Israel is doing the work of the US in the region, when in fact it's the other way around. The US is doing the work of Israel in the region. I mean, we could go back to the war of Iraq in 1991, and then 2003. But I'm sure that even we will not even have the time to be able to cover all those examples.
Let's focus on the propaganda you mentioned and the Israeli lobby. As I said, since 1967, Israel's support for America's support for Israel increased tenfold, and you have this famous quote by the former U.S. President Joe Biden, where he said, "If there was no Israel, we would have to create and invent an Israel," suggesting that Israel does serve American interests. So I think on one level, you can see why after the Cold War, Israel may have been a major ally of the Americans. But over the years, less and less so, and because of that, because there is a gap between American interest and Israel's interest. That is the gap which the lobby then comes and fills in, the Israeli lobby, which many authors like Mearsheimer has pointed out, and the lobby, it has been successful in telling a story about America, about Israel, which cements that relationship. I like a quote in your article which you mentioned. You said that you quote Voltaire, and you said, "Those who can believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." So what are the absurd things about Israel and Palestine that are being told by the Israeli lobby and others who have filled that gap between the chasm between American interests in Israel and US Israel interests? What are the absurdities? What are the stories which the lobby, which is not simply AIPAC, many other pro-Israeli groups, more than just AIPAC, what have they been telling the American public over the years to cement that relationship and make sure it did not fracture? Because one of the purpose of the lobby is what? One of the purpose of the lobby is to whitewash crimes, and you'd have lobby over the years, lobby for the tobacco industry. Tobacco is very, very harmful to you. So there has to be a way of selling tobacco to the public. Alcohol is very, very bad for you. So you need the alcohol lobby to present alcohol in a manner which gets people addicted to alcohol. I think a similar thing is happening with the Israeli lobby, where Israel, by its nature, is committing all kinds of atrocities and crimes, but it has to be whitewashed and presented to the American public in such a way that the American public will continue to support Israel. So what are the absurd things about Israel which the lobby is propagandizing and telling the American public as to why they should support Israel?
Yeah, before I address the specific examples of that, and I will do that, the defining the role of Israel also changes a lot, with periods. as an example, you mentioned the Cold War. That was the first time where Israel supposedly is as an Israeli ally during the Cold War. And now it's of course the Muslims and Islams and civilization, and what they call it, that they have shared civilization with the West. So this keeps continue to change, and it will continue even to change in the future. Believe me, when a different defined enemy, the Israeli lobby and the Israeli control of the media in the US would be able to define that as the new enemy for the US. So the US would fight it for Israel. For the specific, or some examples we could talk about actually about the absurdities that they were able to convince I would say, the politicians and I mean, to an extent, the public for a long time, until recently, by the way. As an example, the latest war between, or I don't want to say between, the latest genocide, the Israeli genocide in Gaza, was defined early on in October 23 as, in the media, as a war between Israel and Hamas. So when the public reads that, they believe that it is really just a war between a nation and defined, the resistance being defined in the media as a terrorist organization. So any killing that you do in Gaza, it's justified because it has been defined to the people that is only a war between Israel and Hamas. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians. So the 70,000 people who were killed and more than 20,000 children who been killed and murdered in Gaza, they were just part of that war between Israel and Hamas. The second part of it, they always sell whenever they kill civilians, they always sell it because Hamas, supposedly they're fighting Hamas only, because Hamas hides among civilians. I mean, let's talk about numbers. I'm an engineer, by the way, and I like numbers. More than 90% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed. That's more than 200,000 homes been targeted in Gaza. The CIA information on the number of fighters in Gaza is roughly 30 to 35,000. Let's just say 40,000. And if you divide the targets, the 200,000 targets they have attacked, divided by the number of 40,000, that makes them like you have to have about 0.2. I mean, each fighter. I mean, there's no single fighter gonna be fighting a war. It's gonna be part of a group. If we assume that they were only, each group had just 2 fighters, that's gonna make it 20,000 groups. And if you divide that by the number of the homes, or the number of the homes divided by the number of groups, fighting groups, that brings it to 0.02, I believe, or around that. So 0.02 of a group has to be at each location for Israel to justify targeting that location. I mean, this is just an example of those absurdities where people can accept it when they read it. Oh, collateral damage. Oh, they're hiding among civilians, but they don't look, or the media doesn't actually question the Israeli spokesman when they say something like that. Well, how can you justify the number of targets you attacked with that doesn't reconcile with the number of fighters in Gaza, for example. This is just one example of that. Also, in October, after October 7, you remember the lies that they spewed basically all over the world, that there were children beheaded, that women were raped, that children were put in ovens, if I don't remember. Even Biden himself, he said he saw the pictures of children, beheaded children, until next day they had to correct it. But you know what? The damage has been done.
Mm.
Once you say that, I mean, how many people are going to be seeing the retraction? Not many people. Another example I'll give you. When they attacked the Al Ahli hospital with a rocket,
Mm.
in the yard. Biden himself said, sitting next to Netanyahu, that it was a Palestinian rocket, when in fact all the evidence showed it was a major rocket, that even Palestinians do not have that capacity to do it. So they tell you all this information, and then whatever they do, they tell you all these absurdities, and then whatever they do will be accepted or at least tolerated by the public. And frankly, it had happened, and it was tolerated for a long time during the last two years of genocide, until I would say the second part of it, when the social media played a different role to counter the mainstream media and allowed people to see the truth on the ground and start making up their mind. And that what created what you just told it, what you just mentioned earlier, the divide between the Israel first individual in the US and the public. Once the public receive the unadulterated information, non-manipulated information, they will be able to make up their mind. And that is really what is happening in the US and in Europe to another extent.
Mm.
And that's just one example of those absurdities.
Yeah, and there are, of course, absurdities in the narrative. The Israeli narrative is presented to different constitutions in the US. So, for those who are secular and liberal, Israel will present itself as a secular liberal democracy. For those who are religious, Israel will cite the biblical verses about those who bless Abraham. The state will be blessed, and those who bless the children of Israel, Abraham will be blessed. So, whichever camp you are in, there seems to be something for you, a narrative which you can, latch onto and provide support for Israel, even though it's committing genocide. So, I remember really early on, this American right-wing influencer. He basically said, okay, there's all this killing going on, massacres going on in the Gaza Strip, but ultimately you have to take a side, and the side we take is the side of those who support Christianity, the side which supports Abraham, and it's between the children of Abraham and those who are terrorists in the shape of form of Hamas. So I choose. So forget the fact that Israel is committing genocide and murder. For him, the only thing that needs to be considered is which side is supporting Abraham, which side is supporting his
Nasim,
constant theme.
I'll give you another example actually related to exactly what you are just saying. The political Zionist movement, when it was established by Theodor Herzl, actually he said it himself. He said the most anti-Semites will be our best friend in the future state of Israel. I mean, they do realize that, so they are willing to use anyone that they can use to advance their narrative, their false narrative, whether it is using religious or liberals. I mean, for a long time in the US, we used to say, they are liberals on everything, but not when it comes to Palestine. And part of it, of course, now using I call it the intellectual terrorism, which is an anti-Semite thing. I mean, whenever anybody would take a stand and support Palestine, they immediately will label them as anti-Semite. The same people, by the way, they are the same people who supported Israel at one stage. But now when they question the genocide that Israeli is committing in Gaza, and also the Jewish mobs that are attacking villages and farms in the West Bank, when they question that, only question it, they would immediately call them anti-Semite. I mean, as an example, I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't think he is pro-Palestinian even, Piers Morgan. Once he started raising some questions about the activities of Israel or the genocide in Israel, he doesn't call it genocide, of course. He calls it sometimes war crimes. When he started raising those questions, they started questioning him also as being an anti-Semite. And I don't think he is a supporter of the Palestinian, to be honest with you. Uh, Tucker Carlson, when he was on Fox News, I mean, he basically was another face also of Israeli propaganda. But when he left Fox, or he was fired from Fox for another other reason, he had more, I would say, freedom in trying to address the specific issues that Israel does. So he is now being called, an anti-Semite. And this is just examples of what they do. So they are willing to work with right-wing Christian Zionist churches, by the way, that believe that the founding of the Jewish state is part of the process for the return of the Messiah. That is who is going to convert Jews to Christianity, and those who do not convert, they're going to be massacred, which is, I believe they say about 2/3 of the Jews would be massacred who do not convert. So they are able, and I have to give them this. I have to give them the credit, starting from Theodor Herzl. I mean, the genius of Theodor Herzl, I would have to say, is being able to find an alignment between the anti-Jewish groups, which they are carried on today by Netanyahu with the Christian Zionist churches, who was able to find an alignment between them and the vision of the political Zionism by establishing a Zionist state in Palestine.
So you spend quite a bit of time in your article looking at how this the narrative is collapsing, and also the counter offensive by the pro-Israeli lobby from purchasing TikTok and various other media companies. Do you want to just go through the list of things the pro-Israelis are doing as a countermeasure to prevent further collapse of support within next generations of Americans?
Up until now, I have to say that the Israeli message or the Israeli narrative in the American media has been subtle. I mean, indirect. I mean, they are able to exactly have the narratives they want without being in the forefront of it. But now with the social media that exposed that narrative, they are becoming like hyenas, where they're gonna bite everyone that they can reach, and in that sense, TikTok really represented a big danger for the Israeli narrative. So that's why they started over 3-4 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, sorry, to try to shut down TikTok, not because of the Chinese control over the data, but because of the Israeli lobby's inability to control the narrative on TikTok, as they've been able to control it on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and the like. So with that, they moved onto that field basically to try to shut it out. And when they weren't able to do it, they proposed to buy it. And that's where Larry Ellison comes into play. Larry Ellison is a very well-known Zionist, Jewish Zionist in the US, who is an Israeli first, not an America first, but used the America first vehicle basically to be able to deliver that message. I mean, I'll give you an example. In his relationship with the Republican Party, he supported Rubio back in 2016 because he believed Rubio was more an Israeli first than even Donald Trump. And in his conversation, as I mentioned it in the article, in his conversation with the Israeli ambassador to the UN, the Israeli ambassador asked him if he trusts Rubio, and basically he told him, yeah, he passed the test and he will be a great friend of Israel. And that's how they work. They coordinate with Israel indirectly. Of course, it becomes known after 10 years, maybe, but they coordinate with Israel indirectly to be able to control elected officials and also the media. His son, Larry Ellison, he's one of the richest people in the US. By the way, he's, I believe, the second richest man. It's between him and Elon Musk now, who is the first one.
Mm.
His son is in charge of CBS and Paramount Picture also. CBS News is a major US news. He assigned or appointed, I shouldn't say assigned, appointed uh, with to head the CBS News. I mean, she was the founder of the Free Press, which is an Israeli agent, I would have to say, in the US media. She is now in charge of CBS News. Part of CBS News, there's a program in the US called 60 Minutes. She is in charge of 60 Minutes too. But you know what? I really, how can I say it? That doesn't, I mean, I'm not really afraid of that because at least now they are in the forefront, in
Mm.
forefront of the media control. In the past, they were controlling the media in the back rooms subtly, but now they are exposed.
Yeah,
And
which is I think which takes us to the final part of our interview, I suppose. Um, the lobby, which previously was clandestine, you can say, has become exposed, and we are seeing this on so many levels. But do you think it's enough now? Do you think the horse has bolted and there's no way of returning back to how it used to be? Because AIPAC has become radioactive. Support for Israel is diminishing. The next generation will not be supporting Israel in the way, for example, baby boomers were. And there's a saying that, um, politics is downstream from culture. So if the American culture is shifting away from Israel in one or two election cycles, you'd see that manifest with seats in Congress. So with AIPAC becoming radioactive and the shifts that are underway, which we've just described, do you think it's too late now for these radio lobby who have just purchased TikTok and are making so many other, I would say, desperate moves to prevent further hemorrhaging of support for Israel? Do you think it's too late for them?
You know, I believe it is actually, but before just concluding that, I mean, you have to look back at the history. I mean, APAC, I would say 30 years ago, if you mention APAC, it is really radioactive in the sense, active in the sense that if APAC plays a role in an election, they are going to defeat those who run against Israel. I'll give you examples of that. There were people back in the 80s as a congressman in Illinois called Paul Findlay. He was taken, I would say, middle of the road, really position with trying to understand the Palestinian side of the story. He wasn't necessarily progressive. He was a Republican, by the way. He wasn't necessarily progressive or a supporter of Palestine, but he questioned Israel, just like Tucker Carlson today questions Israel, just like Pat Buchanan questioned Israel at the time. Uh, he lost his, they call him, they primed him out, which means he lost in the primary, in the Republican primary. He ended up writing a book, They Dare to Speak Out, basically talking about his experience with APAC. So APAC was really radioactive those days. If they fight you, you're done. Today, it's totally different. I mean, I never expected 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago even, I never expected to receive a text on my phone from a candidate telling me, saying, I mean, not just me, to everybody, I'm sure, saying, I will not accept money from APAC. So now APAC it's becoming danger to elected officials or potential elected officials in the US. And I believe it is moving in that direction. And I honestly would be able to predict this. The election of 26 will be the start of that, clear division within the American political system. And 28, the election of the president in 28, will be the start of that break. I believe Palestine will be a main issue in the 28 election, whereby whoever gonna be the candidate of those parties, the two parties, will know that they have to take a clear position in at least defending human rights, not necessarily pro-Palestinians per se, but at least defending human rights and question the loyalty toward Israel. Because what we have until now with the Trump administration, and before him with the Biden administrations, basically two administrations that they whitewash the Israeli crimes, protect Israel at the United Nations, and provide them with all the weapons they need to carry out their genocide in Palestine, and whether it's in Gaza or now what's going on in the West Bank. So I could guess that it is really the beginning of the end for AIPAC influence in U.S. election, and also the beginning of the end for the domination of the Israeli narratives in the American media.
Let's on that end on that positive note. I mean, there are many historians who have also said something similar to it. You're saying that we are at the beginning of the end of not just AIPAC's domination, AIPAC's influence, but also the beginning of the end of Zionism itself. There are internal fractures within Israel that will make it unsustainable, in the long term. We'll of course see how that plays out. Jamal, thank you so much. For those who are interested in reading his article, go to the Middle East Monitor website, and the article is called "How Israel First Jewish Americans Plan to Re-Monopolize the Narrative on Palestine." So thank you, Jamal, and thank you also for tuning in to this conversation with Memo. Bye-bye.